This isn't a story about who becomes the next James Bond.
It's about the fact that the role no longer functions the way you think it does, because the conflict has already moved past survival, past victory, past replacement, into something quieter and far more final.
The mistake is assuming the franchise is still asking who holds the gun, when the real question is who is being held in place.
Bond is no longer deployed, he is maintained, not because he's unstoppable, but because stopping him would collapse too much at once. The system around him has grown dependent on his presence, the way old cities depend on unstable foundations.
Everyone knows they're cracked. Everyone knows they should be rebuilt. But no one can afford to touch them.
This is why the idea of a new Bond feels wrong without anyone saying it out loud.
Because the next figure isn't stepping forward to continue a legacy. He's stepping in to absorb pressure, to seal fractures, to keep something contained that can no longer be allowed to roam freely. That containment isn't physical. It's narrative, institutional, psychological.
The myth of Bond was once useful because it created uncertainty, a single variable moving unpredictably through closed systems.
Now that unpredictability is gone, his patterns are documented, his ethics are understood, his reactions are expected. His moral code didn't erode, it stabilized, and that stability turned him into infrastructure.
He no longer disrupts systems. He reinforces them simply by existing. Every time he makes the right call, the system avoids having to change. Every time he survives, the structure that created him postpones accountability.
That's why the antagonist no longer needs to win. The pressure is already applied.
The damage no longer requires a villain's presence. What's being forced isn't destruction, it's permanence.
The world around Bond has adjusted to him the way environments adjust to long-term radiation. Not by fighting it, but by building around it, compensating, normalizing. Mi-6 doesn't need to believe in victory anymore, because victory implies an endpoint, and endpoints are dangerous when the system itself is exhausted.
Instead, it believes in continuity, in controlled decay, in keeping things familiar enough that no one asks whether the original purpose still exists.
Bond's strength was always clarity, a fixed internal compass in a world of shifting loyalties. But clarity becomes a liability once everyone else can see it too. His ethics are no longer personal, they're procedural.
They can be anticipated, redirected, used as leverage. When you know someone will always choose responsibility over freedom, you don't need to threaten them, you just need to present the situation. That's the trap. Awareness replaces force.
The danger is no longer death, it's participation. Bond can walk away at any time, but doing so would expose how much depends on him staying. That's the containment.
Not a cell, not a title, but obligation multiplied by consequence. The new Bond doesn't arrive to inherit the name. He arrives to take weight of a structure that's sagging under its own history.
He exists so the system can tell itself it has options, while ensuring none of them require real change.
Replacement becomes a form of denial. The myth continues, but its function shifts. Bond used to be a weapon aimed outward.
Now he's a load-bearing element pointed inward, holding together institutions that can't survive transparency.
Secrecy isn't power anymore, it's inertia. The world doesn't need secrets to be controlled, it needs narratives to stay intact.
And Bond is the most durable narrative they have.
The villain understands this, which is why they don't need to pull the trigger.
Their success doesn't depend on the final confrontation, because the confrontation is no longer the point. The change has already happened at the level of structure.
Bond can still save the day, and that's precisely the problem, because every success confirms that the old model still works just enough to avoid replacement.
His competence delays reform.
His sacrifice, if it comes, won't be heroic, it will be logistical.
The system won't mourn him, it will redistribute his function.
This is where survival loses meaning. Living doesn't restore balance, it preserves imbalance.
Dying doesn't end the cycle, it hardens it into legend. There is no clean exit, only withdrawal so gradual it looks like continuity. By the final act, the tension isn't about whether Bond can stop what's coming, it's about whether anyone will notice that what's coming has already arrived. The franchise isn't moving toward a climax, it's moving toward stabilization, the most dangerous state of all, where nothing explodes, nothing resolves, and nothing truly ends.
The realization isn't that Bond is obsolete, it's that he's indispensable in the worst possible way. Not as a hero, not as a man, but as a role the system can no longer survive without, even though that role is what's killing it. And when the next Bond steps into frame, it won't feel like a beginning. It will feel like a reinforcement.
A door closing softly behind something that isn't allowed to leave anymore. You can feel the moment the story stops advancing and starts tightening. Not because something fails, but because everything becomes measurable. That's the shift you're meant to miss. When a system begins to record something obsessively, it isn't honoring it, it's bracing for impact. Bond doesn't vanish here.
He's indexed, logged, broken down into usable fragments.
Decisions stripped of context.
Instincts flattened into precedent. And suddenly it hits you. This isn't memory. This is preparation, because archives aren't built for respect. They're built for continuity without consent. What gets archived is no longer allowed to surprise the present.
That's the first rupture.
The role hasn't ended. It's been neutralized.
Still necessary, still referenced, but no longer permitted to alter the trajectory.
And once you see that, it becomes hard to ignore how quiet everything gets. No alarms, no betrayal, just a calm acceptance that unpredictability is now a liability. Choice still exists, but it feels wrong.
Claustrophobic. Every option already approved, every consequence already modeled.
He isn't stopped because stopping him would admit fear. Instead, he's allowed to move inside corridors that cannot collapse the structure.
And that's when it turns sharp, because freedom hasn't been removed, it's been made useless. The system doesn't need to control Bond anymore.
It knows him, knows what he will sacrifice, knows what he will never abandon.
His moral code, the thing that once made him dangerous, is now a safety feature.
And that realization lands hard, because it means the trap doesn't close around his body, it closes around his identity. The new Bond fits perfectly into this environment, not as a continuation, but as a shock absorber.
He exists to make transitions painless, to drain urgency out of crisis, to ensure nothing breaks loudly enough to demand reform.
And here's the uncomfortable spike. The part that makes your stomach tighten. Bond's absence would be more destabilizing than any enemy ever was.
As long as he's there, the system can point to him and say control still exists. Remove him, and deferred consequences start moving all at once.
Questions multiply.
Authority fragments. That's why leaving isn't heroic, it's catastrophic. Staying maintains decay, leaving accelerates collapse. There is no clean choice left, only acceptable damage. And this is where the illusion of a final mission finally dies.
Not dramatically, administratively.
There is no ending designed to release tension.
What's happening is decommissioning, quiet,
Procedural.
carried out while everything continues as if nothing is wrong. The role isn't retired, it's dissolved into process.
Action replaced with documentation.
Judgment replaced with protocol.
And that's the moment that should unsettle you, because Bond doesn't fail here, and he doesn't win.
He's absorbed,
Rendered safe.
turned into something the system can survive using indefinitely. Not a man, not a hero, a stabilized function. And the realization lingers, cold and permanent, that the franchise hasn't been building toward a conclusion at all.
It's been training itself to operate without one. The door doesn't slam. It closes softly. And once it's closed, no one inside is allowed to remember that it was ever open.